My first post on the lacrosse case was April, I think, 17th of 2006, and I praised two groups. The first was the Duke Chronicle. The second is President Brodhead. My perception of Brodhead at the time was someone who had sort of stood up to faculty extremists and had handled the case well. I learned a lot more about the case over the last year and a quarter. One of the things that I incorrectly assumed at the time, and I suspect most people within Durham incorrectly assumed, was that Brodhead was totally blindsided by these allegations, that he and his administration had no access to what went on at the party, that the lacrosse players, who we were told by Mike Nightbong had put up a wall of silence, had done so similarly with Duke officials as well. What, of course, we all know is that the lacrosse players had spoken to any Duke official who was willing to listen to them to tell them that there had been no rape. That attorneys representing the lacrosse players had offered to share any and all of their information with Duke administrators to show that there had been no rape. The president at this point to have publicly declared our students are innocent. But again, keeping in mind that the normal goal of academics is to stand up for due process, it was striking how little this came from Brodhead. And perhaps it was because he just didn't care very much about due process, although I don't think that's the case. I think the far more likely explanation is that he recognized as a college president that forcefully confronting this very aggressive and extreme group of faculty could be hazardous to his professional health. A year before, Larry Summers had discovered a similar lesson at Harvard, and it would again be very difficult to believe that President Brodhead didn't learn that lesson as well. To give a sense of how Brodhead did or did not emphasize the presumption of innocence, on March 28th he gives a press conference of 2006. He talks about the presumption of innocence in his formal statement. The Duke official press release from the Office of News and Communications about that press conference doesn't contain any mention of Brodhead's mention of presumption of innocence because it was a formulaic mention, sort of a wink and a nod. Yes, there's presumption of innocence, but there was a crime, we're not challenging. In Brodhead's last statement before the arrest of Colin Finnerty and Reed Seligman on April 5th, that statement is still on the website. I would invite people to read it. It's 2,377 words long. It did not contain even a mention of the presumption of innocence and instead urged people to defer any action until the authorities acted, presumably until the police made arrests. And it led off with 5 paragraphs that he linked the lacrosse players to both rapists and to racists of the past. It had a passage that seemed to excuse even the most extreme of the protesters. 2 days after the arrests of Seligman and Finnerty, Brodhead gives his first off-campus public appearance after the arrests. He addresses the Durham Chamber of Commerce, and he tells the assembled audience that if our students did what is alleged is a horrible crime. Absolutely true. And then he adds a second line where he says that if our students, even if they didn't do it, and I'm directly quoting here, whatever they did was bad enough. We now know what Reed Seligman and Colin Finnerty did. They attended a party, they played no role in organizing, and they drank some beer. If that's bad enough to be publicly compared to Adolf Hitler, as they were by one cable commentator, and to have your mugshots on the cover of Newsweek, there are going to be lots of Duke students and lots of Brooklyn students and lots of college students in the country who have done things that are bad enough. In the summer, a new grassroots group of Duke public letter in the Chronicle urging Brodhead not to make a statement about guilt or innocence, but simply to stand up for due process and to demand that Duke students be treated according to the same procedures that all other Durham residents received. Brodhead responded by declining that recommendation. He said that the case would need to continue in courts and that a trial, and I'm quoting directly, would allow, quote, our students to be proved innocent. This is about as fundamental a misreading of the American criminal justice system as you can get. It is astonishing that this could have come from the president of one of the 10 best universities in the country. Trials do not exist in this country to allow the accused to be proved innocent. So the administration essentially abandoned what I think of as the traditional role of academics, which is to stand up for due process even in a society that frequently gives a short shrift to due process. Academics are supposed to stand up also for the dispassionate evaluation of evidence in search for the truth. Presumably this is what we're paid to do. Instead, what we saw from one group, one faction within the group of 88 and their allies, was an utter closed-mindedness to the truth and to any new facts, as Nightbong's case collapsed over the fall and early winter of 2006. And let me single out four people in this regard. Peter Wood, history professor, gave an interview to the New Yorker, very prestigious magazine, suggesting that lacrosse players in his 2004 class had advocated genocide against Native Americans. His basis for this claim, a single statement from an anonymous student evaluation in a class of 65 that Wood asserted as fact, without any substantiation, came from a lacrosse player. Grant Brodhead, since departed to Cornell, published the last statement of any Duke professor before the election of 2006. He stated that the Duke students who had had the temerity to register to vote in Durham were guilty of a secret racism. That's a direct quote. Later on, in a public address, Brodhead accused unnamed lacrosse players of being guilty, and both of these are direct quotes, of perjury and of arrogant sexual prowess. In January of 2007, Carla Hollaway, a former associate dean, sent a mass email passing along what was fifth-hand, unsubstantiated gossip that Reed Seligman and Colin Finnerty were in the lacrosse house at the time that racial slurs occurred, and that there was a witness who might come forward to testify to this fact. And then in February, an ally of the group of 88 that signed the so-called clarifying letter that went out a few weeks prior to this, gave an interview stating that he was not concerned that he might be considered as biased against athletes because athletes did not enroll in any of his courses because, and I'm quoting directly, "I do not give quizzes, I give very hard reading." The implication was that each and every student athlete at Duke University is either lazy or dumb or both. The faculty handbook at Duke states the following, and I'm quoting, "Members of the faculty expect Duke students to meet high standards of performance and behavior. It is only appropriate, therefore, that the faculty adheres to comparably high standards in dealing with students. Students are fellow members of the university community, deserving of respect and consideration in their dealings with the faculty." Can anyone credibly say that Wood, Brodhead, Holloway, or Surin respected the provisions of the faculty handbook in these remarks? And yet there is no evidence that in any way that any were disciplined by the administration. And it's worth thinking what message this sends to students, not only at Duke, but anywhere else. Students presumably are held to the community standard. Those of you who have been reading Elliot Wolf's columns in the Chronicle might have noticed that this has been interpreted in unusual ways from time to time at Duke. But it appears that faculty are not held to the comparable standard of behavior, that the faculty handbook is enforced when it is politically convenient to do so, but when it is not, the provisions are overlooked. And that, to me, I think is a bad message to send. Finally, the group's legacy was in what amounted to an almost Orwellian attempt to redefine the past by less extreme members of the group. And I think the best example of this comes in an op-ed that was published in the NNO in January of 2007 by Kathy Davidson. Davidson, from all accounts, she's one of the more moderate members of the group of 88. She's distinguished, she's very well regarded both in her field and nationally. She's not someone, in short, who could be attacked as a sort of out-of-touch academic radical. And in that op-ed, Davidson, she's speaking of the group, of the formulation of the Group of 88's act. So this is between March 29th, 2006 and April 6th, 2006. So the first week plus after this case had become public. And here's what she says as the justification for the ad, and I'm quoting. "The ad said that we faculty were listening to the anguish of students who felt demeaned," she's speaking of African American students, felt demeaned by racist and sexist remarks swirling around in the media and on the campus quad in the aftermath of what happened on March 13th in the lacrosse house. The insults at that time were rampant. It was as if defending David Everding to pernicious stereotypes about African Americans, especially poor black women. Many of you were here, either on campus or in Durham, during the period from March 29, 2006 to April 6, 2006. I would invite you to think back to that time about all of the apparently hundreds of people who were on the campus quad, to use Davidson's term, who were out defending the lacrosse players. Apparently these people escaped the attention of just about everyone except for Kathy Davidson, since, as we all know, in fact, there was virtually no one defending lacrosse players at this time, and there certainly was no one defending Reed Seligman or Colin Finnerty, since their names weren't even in popular circulation at the time.